we're going to talk about has to do with film financing and how it can exist on the blockchain. What we're seeing right now is that there are a lot of different possibilities for it. There isn't a solid possibility. There isn't even one that I think actually works all the way through. Part of the working of it has to do with, working from end to end, as I'll say again later. Haven't seen anything. There's ideas for that, and they're starting to come about. But I think we're living in a world that everything's a bit of a hybrid, and that's something we just need to face. We were talking about some things before, and I think Sam made a very good point that we need to stop trying to compare to the big boys and what they do. They do what they do, we do what we do. This is something they can monetize, niche media, and that's really the key. And it's ways to make that work, not necessarily trying to replace Warner Brothers or 20th Century Fox or any of them, because that's not about to happen anytime soon. And it's really not my goal. My goal is to be able to make films, and that's really where we stand with this. So.
Yes, Larry. So, the film industry has just dramatically changed in the last probably 6 years or so. The event of streaming, just content being everywhere. And one of the opportunities in terms of making the films is that all of the technology that once was unattainable is completely attainable now. The cameras are smaller, the microphones are cheaper, the lights are smaller and easier to get to. People are making movies on their phones. And so all of this has really opened up the gates for almost anyone to make something, or some really smart people to make really great things at a much lower barrier to entry than was ever before. And that technology is a part of the driving force of getting the content out into the marketplace. You can make a movie, a short movie or a feature, and you can put it on YouTube or Vimeo or any of those places that you weren't able to do that before. The other new transformation in entertainment is home entertainment. It used to have, I don't know if anybody here remembers having those big box TVs that you have to wheel in with 3 people. Flat screen television, projection television has created an opportunity for entertainment to be in the home, to be just as much of an experience as it was when you went out into the theater. The market for content in and of itself has expanded tremendously, with China being probably one of the biggest markets for content just behind the United States, which has made the market expand exponentially. So people are, it's cat videos in and of themselves are a thing and have a niche place in the marketplace because just there's so many people want to consume the content and are interested in higher quality content. So again, you have all these streaming platforms that are places that you can get content anywhere. So whether it's on your phone or your tablet or your television, there's no place that you can't enjoy what you want, which has opened the marketplace for more content. It's also created a bit of a funnel because right now, probably there are 6 global streaming services that are really the ones where people are consuming content. But that's had an impact on the movie business. The ticket prices have gone up, so the volume, the revenue's gone up, but less and less people are going to actual theaters. Although MoviePass and MoviePass-like platforms may stop that decline. So the 2 big players right now in the US are Netflix and Amazon, and they're spending on average between $4 to $6 billion a year creating content. So obviously people are consuming this and they're making even more, they're spending even more, which again I think creates an opportunity for it to be homogenized to create the value for them to make it profitable. So you got to make something that they know or believe is going to sell. So the current models for actually making content is about 4 of them. So the main one is the legacy one, which is You find a way to get into the big studio, get your story told, and they give you some money and they take all the power and the control for it. The second one down from that is the opportunity to do what's called pre-sales, which you go around and you say, this is a great movie we're going to make, and you go and try to find other communities that would be interested in that, and usually from around the world, and that's how you finance your film. The next opportunity down from that is equity financing. You go, you find your rich uncle, your cousin, Jeff Bezos, and say, give me some money, I got the greatest idea in the world, and they give you the money to make your film. And then the last one, the one that's most prevalent, that's burst the doors open for content in the last 5 years, is crowdfunding. And going to friends and family in a much more organized way and say, listen, I really want to make this great content. Can you give us $10? Can you ask your friends to give us $10? And people have successfully used the crowdfunding platforms to make really great content. Some stuff that's kindergarten-like, but some really great content that's been made using those platforms. So the next step in that iteration is probably going to be the blockchain. Blockchain cryptocurrency.
Just want to make one comment. One of the problems, because you really want to understand some of the problems of some of these models that we're looking at right now, and one of the problems with crowdfunding is that in general, it's like you go out, you talk to your friends, you get your family, and they say, yeah, I got a great idea, come on, let's do it. And so everybody puts in their stuff, and they put in all their money, and you go out and you make your film, you take it out to film festivals, and maybe you get a little bit of a release, maybe it gets out there, maybe it works out fairly well, and it gets picked up by a distributor or something. But you've learned something as a filmmaker, you've gained something in terms of your reputation moving forward, but in general, you're not making very much on that, and I guarantee you the people that put in money are making nothing. So, the second time you want to go out and make a film, you are actually going back, you are actually going to the same people saying, now I want to do it again, and they're saying, wait a minute, I just did this for you. I'm not going back in my pocket another time just to give you money that's not going to get back to me. I can't afford that anymore. So this is, there's a limitation. You get your first run for free. And then after that, everybody's, no, not so much. It's not a renewable model.
I think I would only add to that, the other hurdle to crowdfunding is not having a big enough network. I mean, not everyone is jovial and gregarious and able to connect with every single person that they've ever met in their life. So the crowdfunding model does work, but the opportunity to really exercise to leverage that is not really available to everyone if you don't know 10,000 people.
Yeah. We kind of talked about the big six. These are where this is where this is 90% of the ownership of all media in the world right now. This is the ownership. This is where it stands. The blockchain's nowhere even on this map.
Well, we're missing Alibaba and Baidu, but generally speaking, I mean, this covers the Western content, but there's maybe 4 or 5 other large entities around the world that also funnel most of the content that's consumed in other countries. So the Kickstarter model, I think people are finding it useful, and it's expanding, and there are more and more platforms, and I think at some point, some of my friends have literally used a number of them simultaneously based on the model, the financing aspect of it. I do think that the value of the Kickstarter platforms is that they become a marketplace for people to find ideas and find content. So I don't think that they'll work for anybody, but I do think it's valuable that people know that if they want to find a movie to fund, or music or art project or a new product, Kickstarter, like crowdfunding sites, are a place to go. So I think that that does provide a great marketing opportunity to put yourself in that marketplace. Debt financing, which is probably the last worst one, it's just being able to collateralize some physical asset in order to create your content with the risk of it working or not working. Again, in the equity platform So there's the general equity, which is you go and you sell shares into the film itself and say, listen, if we make some money, you all get to make some money, and if you don't, it's a really big risk. What's also emerging is equity crowdfunding platforms. The regulations are just beginning to be solidified, and the marketplace is trying to figure out how they best can do it. They haven't been centered around the arts necessarily, so it'll be interesting to see who will step into that void and begin to do equity crowdfunding around the arts. That may be a really great opportunity. Enter the blockchain. And what we think that's really revolutionary is the opportunity to operate using whatever cryptocurrency is the best at the particular time, but also the underlying structure of the blockchain, and using a smart contract to attract investors, do royalties and revenue, but also create an opportunity for a continuous, sustainable stream of income that everyone can understand when they're getting it, how much they're getting, and the sort of the long tail of what's happening for the project.
Okay, so we've been talking about blockchain all day, so I'm not going to go back and go over all the things that blockchain is, because you know it's a digital ledger, you know it involves with smart contracting. We've heard a lot about that on the music industry. Cryptocurrency is part of that. Difficult to hack, transparent. These are the keys. These are the important part. Less middlemen. I will not say no, because there's always going to be some middlemen. Even if it's just the company that decided to build the app that's putting the platform online. There is something that somebody else needs to be involved in. It's not going to be from my brain to your brain. So that's part of what has to happen here. But you can get more direct to your audience, and that's an important part of it. So we want to look at financial models. We want to look at kind of, how we can begin to set up a model that can work for the individual, can help to build the company at the same time, can move a project forward. So here's where we're going to go. We start out by setting up a financial fund. This is going to be the model that works, that can work on the block. You start by setting up a financial fund. You're going to be setting projects in terms of time. You're going to have a strict structure of return of investment back to your investors, so that you're setting up something that is stable and long-lasting. This is part of it. It has to be stable, and it has to be something that's repeatable. So we're not just talking about just doing a one-off here, but talking about creating ongoing, projects from this. And it's really, as I keep saying, it's from the front to the back, and you'll understand more about that in a second. So we start, forgive my strange art, but we start with this kind of a model. You have your investors over here. We won't get into how you get your investors. That's a totally different meeting and structure. But you gather together your investors. You set them up with a smart contract that invests their money. And once you get to a point where it's what we call a threshold, you're working towards a particular goal. You've got a film that you want to make. That film has got a budget. You know what that budget is. You know what the goal is that you need to make in order to be able to produce that film. So you're raising funds to get to a certain threshold. When it hits that threshold, that money moves inside of the smart contract to the output. So where the film, where it goes into the actual film itself. Right? So now we're going to move it from here, from the investment side, which is a model that we can set up with smart contracts, right? From the investment side out to the film itself, to the pre-production side of it. There are a couple of things you need at this side of it that's extremely important. These are kind of normal for film. It's not something that exists particularly on the blockchain. These are just all the elements you need in order to make this work. One, obviously, you want to put together a package. This is the key here. This is one of the models that is moving through the industry. You can't just come up with a script and then it all, ask the big boys to fill it in. As we get into these smaller models, you have to have an entire package. You have to have something that's got the major pieces inside of it ready to go in order to launch this forward, because it's going to require a vehicle. So you're going to need a producer. Obviously, there must be a script attached to it. There's going to be a director that should be attached to it. It should be location-based, so you should be aware of where you're going to shoot it and how the shooting of it, will be affected in the particular landscape that you are, whatever may be pertinent to the script itself. Obviously, you've got a budget, and you also need principal talent as you're moving forward with something like that. So this is like the egg. You've got to have all of these pieces together, ready to go, before you can move forward. So even when you got your money, this is going to be one piece of it. The next piece of it, see, the egg's got to sit somewhere. It's got to be on a vehicle. See, this is what moves it forward. You've got to be able to put that egg in something. Now, partially, I talk about tax incentives, that there are certain tax incentives, social media, and distribution outlets. This has to be part of the early discussion. You don't wait for that until the end of the film, which a lot of people do. This conversation needs to be up front. Tax incentives and other kinds of things you can get depending on where you're shooting it and what they're willing to give back. All that stuff is very, very useful. That's all part of your budgeting and making sure it's in place. Social media is something you need to be building with each project as it goes forward. You're going to build social media in two different planes. One for the individual film that you're actually going to make. So you start at the beginning, in the greenlighting stage of the film. Once we've got the money in place, you start with social media, bringing up the talent, bringing up locations, bringing up all the things that are going to make the film valuable in time, and also start a buzz on it. So monetizing your social media is very important at this stage, because that's going to increase your audience at the end of it. Then you're going to move into, you need to be talking to various forms of distribution, right? You've got one that's on the blockchain, that's great, because you want to have one that's actually going to give you feedback. This is a real important issue when you're starting to work in distributing your film. You need to get feedback from the distributor as to what people are looking at. Why do they like it? Where is it going? Who is watching it? That kind of feedback is gold to you, particularly since you plan to be making films ongoingly. This is not a one-shot deal. I'm going to keep repeating that. You're not trying to set up a company to make one movie. You're trying to set up a studio to make movies on the blockchain. Not as expensive as the big blockbusters. We're not trying to compete with them. But we do want to make reasonable, independent films, but regularly. In order to do that, you need to get feedback. Did that film do well? Why did it do well? Did the stars do well in it? What are the things that people liked about it? What are the things that people didn't like about it? Because when you go to do your next film, you want to think about those things when you're putting it together. I'm not saying it should be totally dictated by the audience, but you really want to know what your audience is thinking, so you can definitely add that to it. The next piece of it is you've done your production. That egg has gotten on the cart, it's moved down, you've done the shooting of it, you've edited it, you're now ready to put it out, right? And you've got these choices here. Now, some of these things you should have already worked on. Foreign market, as we talked about earlier, foreign market's a really big piece. It didn't used to be a big piece in film distribution, but foreign market these days is a very big piece of film distribution. And the more you can set that up in pre-production, the better off you're going to be. So that's going to be a big one. As we said, China is almost, they're like $12 billion a year in film. They're second only to the US in terms of the taking in of content. So you want to look at those markets, because you can make back the money if your budgets aren't too big just from the foreign market. Just from your foreign market. And then you still get to monetize in the streaming, in your streaming platforms. You still get to do, you get to do, video on demand and streaming platforms as well. So that's the US market that you get to go. Theatrical, here's the buzz with theatrical. You can do theatrical, but you better know that in theatrical, you better have a 400% bump on what you're going to do. It's what it takes to make theatrical worthwhile doing. The expense of theatrical is a lot, because you've got to get out there and market it. Oh yeah, you can stick it in a theater and nobody comes and nobody knows, which is half the problem with it. You know, you're really not going to make anything on that. And most of the time when they do that, they're doing it for one reason. They can say they had a theatrical release so that they can sell it for more money when they go do video on demand or the streaming. But it really wasn't anything that they made any money on in the process. That's kind of how that works. You know, you stick it in a couple of theaters, say it had a theatrical run. And so they said, well, if it had a theatrical run, then they'll pay a little bit more for it when they start talking about, you know, video on demand and the streaming platforms for it. But that's really its place in terms of independent films. I don't think that that's the biggest market. You know, sometimes you get a blockbuster, you get an independent that can really blow up. It happens from time to time. If that's happening and you've got that, you know you've got that 400% margin that you can afford, go for it.
Well, also, Larry, the other valuable opportunity with the theatrical market is to getting reviews from the larger critics.
Absolutely.
So if you have a film that nobody may hear about, when they find it on Hulu or Netflix or Vimeo or Apple TV, when they find it there's a review that they'll be able to look up from a recognized critic that'll give you hopefully a good review, and that'll probably encourage you to click yes or download or stream.
Yeah, very important. So this is, forgive me for the, this thing crushed on my stuff. It get jumbled, all right. But let's, you know, we started with the input going from here, starting with the your basic investors, moving from your investors with a timed palette, you know, meaning that like they know from the time that those funds are released into the project when they're going to get their return. This is very important. You want to start to set up things that they work on a regular basis. Right? So it's going to go from here, it's going to go into the film, it's going to go into the film cart, which is going to be carrying that egg, which has all of your principal elements and players forward. As that happens, when you finish making the film, you then monetize the foreign market, your streaming markets, right? Possibly the theatrical, right? And that's money coming back in. That becomes part of the ROI, which comes back around to this model, back into the fund, where that money gets split between going back and paying off your investors, what you promised them from the very beginning, and also going into other films that you're going to produce. So it becomes a circular model that then begins to grow, and that fund itself can begin to grow if you set this up and run it properly. Each time you do it, the beauty of it is it gets better. When you have a good distributor, when you've got contacts with distributors, all of this starts to flow better as it gets, you know, as you do it more often, right? And that's the important part of it. The first time you do it, it's going to be rough. You know, you're not going to have all the answers. The pieces are going to be all over the table, right? As you do it again, you're going to have some things that are set. If you get some feedback about your film, you know some things when you're going back into the stage of doing your next project. You know, all of this starts to work together, right? And that's the beauty of this. These contracts, the smart contract here, the ROI that goes back into your fund, that keeps this machine moving, is like it's supplying its own gas. You know, it's a vehicle that's actually feeding itself going forward as you get involved in doing productions. And as I said before, we're talking about multiple productions.
Well, thank you for listening.
So are there any questions or anything we're more than willing to talk about the questions, talk about ideas that have come up with this? Sure. Consumption. That chart was the consumption. That's the thing. They're actually looking for us to make films.
Yes, and one of that I don't agree with that. So what's the cost of making a film in English and changing it to Mandarin or Chinese?
That depends if you're gonna do it at post-production, then it's the simple cost of overdubbing, like the old Chinese movies. Or what people have begun to do is to make the films in various languages while they're making the film. So that's become part of production now. They're making films in maybe 4 or 5 specific languages, Arabic, French, English, and some version of Chinese.
Little tricky, little tricky.
A little trickier, but it's something that's really, it's enabling them to move forward much more quickly in the process.
One thing about that to know, the Chinese market is very, very used to the dubbed. The Americans, we see a dubbed piece, we say, that's that, we can't deal with that, that's horrible. But the Chinese market has always dubbed their films because the dialects of Chinese vary all over the continent. And so they always have subtitles there, and they're used to dubbing them. I mean, I did a film, this is quite a while ago, but I did a film in Taiwan, and at the time that I did the film, they, this was back in the early 90s, right? I did a film and we had to bring the camera in from Hong Kong because they didn't have any sync sound cameras in the country. And they said, we've been doing sync sound films for 50 years. But, why does China in Taiwan not have a sync sound? So because we don't use that. They use non-sync cameras and they dub everything afterwards. So they do everything with overdubbing at that point. I'm not saying they still do, but I'm just saying it's like that's something that they're quite used to in that particular market. So the dubbing doesn't seem to bother them. They like the American content movies. Some things are doing very well. John, what were you telling me about that?
Venom made $79 million this weekend.
In China. Not in this country. That's kind of like good weekend sales in this country, but in China.
Thank you, very good job. It's a very good presentation. The question I want to ask is this: is that for the films that are like America, basically is where you make the standard of the quality of film in the sense of English-speaking films aside, right?
Okay.
Now, the point is that what do you see going forward? Like 4 years from now, what do you predict in the industry based on what you know now?
I think it's going to flatten out. The quality of production around the world is as high as it's ever been. So this year alone, 87 countries have submitted films for the Oscars for the documentary competition. And I've seen maybe 20 of them. The production value, the attention to detail is just as good as anything you would have seen in the United States. So the technology is evening it out as well. And then people are moving themselves around the world. So that the capacity to build that kind of infrastructure of technicians and skill sets, you won't. If you see a movie with the sound off, you won't know where it was made, probably by next year.
Wow.
I mean, there are several also things that you should really understand that we're not the only English-speaking market that's going on out there. Australia's making a lot of films. UK is making a lot of films. They're one of the third largest consumers, strangely enough. And the Canadians, they're doing a lot of TV.
They're doing a lot of great television.
They're doing a lot of TV. So there's a lot of other, inputs into what's going on in these marketplaces out there right now, things to be aware of.
Sure. Are you aware of any film financing that's actually using blockchain yet?
There is one that I am aware of. It's Hollywood Movie Coin.
Okay.
And they've got a soup to nuts kind of approach, very similar to what we talked about here. They've got a film fund. They're working at a much higher level, so they're putting a lot. We're talking 500 million in their fund that they're working on, and they've also got a blockchain distributor that's really important to them because that's how they get the stuff back. They get feedback on their stuff and keep their stuff moving forward. But Hollywood Movie Coin is one of the companies that's doing it.
But do you see this, what you're talking about, as different, as more for independent, smaller budget films, and are you looking to build this so that other people could access it, or would this be a one project per scenario thing, or are you looking to build like a platform that would let other people use it to fund their projects?
Well, here's the thing, John and I are involved in building so we call it a studio. Because we think, we don't want to look at it as just a production company that's doing that's doing a film, but a studio that's going to do multiple films. And we're building this model. Once we build this model, it really becomes accessible to anyone. We're not hiding it or keeping it away. We're building this model to create a working model for financing through production of films so that others can utilize it.
Yeah, and I'm also aware of some films that were made actually using Bitcoin. I don't know of any Ethereum films, but I know of a feature film that was made using the Bitcoin to finance and produce the film.
Yeah. And we've looked at different models. I mean, to really if you want to get in, down in the dirty part of it, we were saying like, yeah, we're going to set up accounts for all the crew, because we're going to pay the crew in like in Ethereum. We decided we're going to pay the crew in Ethereum, so we're going to set up an account for every single member of the crew with Coinbase. Not going to be difficult. They're going to be happy to have us setting them up in the business. That gives them an account. That means that it'll be easy for them to take their money. We're going to give it to them in Ethereum, but if they want to change it directly to fiat, that's what Ethereum does. That's what Coinbase does. So they can just turn it to that and put it in their bank if they don't want to leave it where it's at. It's totally up to them. But it actually makes it viable and not so like everybody's afraid. It's like, oh, what am I going to do with this cryptocurrency? I can't. I said, like, I'm going to give you an account that is in cryptocurrency, and you can turn it to fiat just as easy as just deciding I want to take it out and I want it in this.
I guess in terms of international movie making in English-speaking countries, do you guys know if anything is going on with Nigerian filmmaking?
With Nigerian filmmaking in particular, I mean, they're moving forward. I don't know whether or not they're using crypto or blockchain to do that, but I can't imagine that that's not going to come into the conversation, because I'm aware that a tremendous amount of crypto, blockchain activities going on in Africa and in Nigeria in particular. I think the next opportunity is really going to be smaller filmmakers, independent filmmakers are going to recognize the opportunity with the technology, and those marriages are going to present creative opportunities. So it's a matter of weeks probably for someone in the crypto or in the blockchain community to make that relationship with an artist to try to raise the money. There's two Nigerian streaming services, so I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of opportunity for those two universes to come together and make art.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming out and hanging in here for us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again.
Thank you for coming out.